Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving deep into Microsoft's latest security updates, focusing on the critical information you need as system administrators and security experts working with Windows 10, Windows 11, and Microsoft Edge.
We're dissecting the PortalFuse weekly security update report and the in-depth analysis of this week's CVEs. Our goal: to ensure your systems are fortified against emerging threats.
So let's jump right into it. Before we get to the heart of this week's vulnerabilities, there's a new known issue we need to flag. It impacts Windows 10 22H2, specifically those running the September 24th update, KB5043131.
That's right. Applications configured with UI access true might fail to start for non-admin users. This seems to be linked to child processes inheriting an incorrect integrity level. While a workaround exists, it's definitely something to monitor closely.
Okay, good to know. Now let's dive into the core of this deep dive. The CVEs themselves. We've got a significant batch this week.
37 in total, with 34 brand new. To help you prioritize, we'll be examining these vulnerabilities not just by severity, but by grouping them based on their potential impact and common attack vectors. We'll start with the most critical cluster, those with a CVSS score of 8.8 falling under the critical severity level.
Sounds like a strategic approach. What's first on the list?
We're seeing a concentration of remote code execution vulnerabilities, the most severe type impacting the Windows telephony service. We're talking about CVE 2024-43627, CVE 2024-43627, CVE 2024-43627, CVE 2024-43621. These all share a similar attack vector.
Meaning?
An attacker could exploit these by enticing a user to connect to a malicious server. This server could then transmit harmful data, triggering code execution on the unsuspecting user's system.
So a classic scenario of exploiting trust and tricking users into opening the door for an attacker. Given the sophistication of some phishing campaigns, I imagine this attack vector is still highly effective.
You're absolutely right. While user interaction is required, it's a relatively low bar for a skilled attacker to clear.
I'm seeing a mix of underlying causes here. Heap-based buffer overflows, integer overflows. Does this variety complicate patching efforts?
It can, while they share a common outcome: remote code execution. The different root causes mean that each vulnerability needs to be addressed with a specific fix within the November 12th security updates. Admins should prioritize deploying KB5046617 for Windows Server 2025 and Windows 11 24H2. KB5046612 for Windows Server 2016 and Windows 10 1607. And the corresponding KBs for other affected versions. Patching these KBs should be at the top of your list.
Right. Shutting down that remote code execution attack vector is critical, especially given the potential for phishing exploits. Are we sticking with critical vulnerabilities for the next cluster?
Yes, we have another set also scoring an 8.8 on the CVSS scale, but this time they involve elevation of privilege. We're looking at CVE 2024-43625 impacting Windows Hyper-V shared virtual disk.
Hyper-V vulnerabilities always make me nervous. Given its widespread use in enterprise environments, what are the attack scenarios we need to be aware of here?
CVE 2024-43625. The VM switch vulnerability involves a use-after-free flaw. An attacker would need to bombard the driver with a specific sequence of networking requests. If successful, they could escalate privileges to the host level and potentially execute code on the Hyper-V host itself. The silver lining here is the complexity involved. The attacker would need to gather specific environmental information to craft the exploit, making it less likely to be widely exploited.
So targeted attacks by sophisticated actors, but still high impact if successful. What about CVE 2024-43624?
That one focuses on the shared virtual disk functionality. An attacker authenticated on a guest VM could manipulate file operation requests targeted at the VM's hardware resources. This could grant them system privileges, a significant escalation of access, and a major security concern.
Both sound pretty serious. I'm assuming patches are available in the November 12th updates.
Absolutely. KB504617, KB504616, and KB504613, depending on the Windows version. Given the criticality of these vulnerabilities and the potential impact on your Hyper-V environment, I'd strongly advise prioritizing these patches as well.
Noted. So far, we've focused on vulnerabilities with the highest severity rating. What's next on our radar?
We're moving down the CVSS scale to a cluster of vulnerabilities with a score of 7.8, still categorized as important. These involve a mix of elevation of privilege and denial of service, DUS flaws.
Okay. A broader range of potential impacts here. Let's start with the DUS vulnerabilities. Any that stand out?
We have CVE 2024-38264 in the Microsoft Virtual Hard Disk, or VHDX. This one's particularly concerning because it's remotely exploitable over the network without requiring any special privileges or user interaction. An attacker could exploit a race condition, leading to a complete loss of availability for the VHDX service.
So potential disruption of virtual machine operations, a major headache for any organization relying on Hyper-V.
Precisely. The root cause lies in sensitive data being stored in improperly locked memory, a common but potentially devastating coding error. The good news is that it's addressed in the November 12th updates.
I'm starting to sense a theme here. KB5046617 for Windows 11 24H2, KB5046633 for Windows 11 23H2 and 22H2. Should I just tattoo these numbers on my arm at this point?
It wouldn't be a bad idea, but seriously, you're right. Microsoft bundles these security fixes together, which makes patching more efficient, but also highlights the interconnected nature of these vulnerabilities.
Makes sense. Okay, let's switch gears to the elevation of privilege vulnerabilities in this group. I see several impacting core Windows components.
Yes, we have CVE 2024-4331 in Windows Secure Kernel Mode, CVE 2024-43623 in the Windows NTOS kernel, CVE 2024-4350 in the Windows Update Stack, and CVE 2024-49046 in the Windows Win32 kernel subsystem. These are all serious vulnerabilities that could allow an attacker to gain system-level access.
That's a lot to unpack. Let's start with CVE 2024-43631. What's the attack vector here?
This one stems from an untrusted pointer to reference, a relatively simple but dangerous coding error. An attacker with high privileges could exploit this locally to gain system-level access. What makes this one particularly concerning is its low complexity, meaning an attacker could likely pull it off without needing any special conditions.
So a relatively easy path to system compromise for an attacker who's already gained a foothold.
Unfortunately, yes. And the same KBs we mentioned earlier apply here as well. KB5046617, KB5046633, and so on, depending on the specific Windows version.
Right. Starting to feel like a broken record with those KB numbers. What about CVE 2024-43623?
This one also results in privilege escalation, specifically within the Windows NTOS kernel. The underlying cause is an integer overflow issue, again, exploitable locally and without any need for user interaction. The impact is significant, as it allows an attacker to essentially bypass security measures and operate with the highest level of system privileges.
And as I'm anticipating, the patch is found in those same November 12th updates.
You know the drill by now. KB5046617, KB5046633. Make sure those are at the top of your patching queue.
Okay, on to the next one, CVE 2024-43530. This one caught my eye because it impacts the Windows Update Stack. That sounds particularly worrisome.
It is. The root cause is improper access control, which could allow an attacker with low privileges to escalate their privileges to system. In essence, they could potentially compromise the very mechanism designed to keep systems secure.
That's a chilling thought. So an attacker could potentially hijack the update process to deliver malicious code or disable security updates altogether.
That's the concern, and given that it's a local attack requiring no user interaction, it's a vulnerability we need to take very seriously.
Definitely adding that to the high priority list. What about the last one in this cluster, CVE 2024-49046?
This one involves the Windows Win32 kernel subsystem and is a bit more complex, involving a time of check, time of use race condition.
Those could be tricky to exploit, right?
They can be. But in this case, the attack complexity is rated as low. This means an attacker could potentially exploit this vulnerability without needing sophisticated tools or techniques. If successful, they could again gain system privileges, giving them complete control over the affected system. And as you might expect, the patch is found in the same set of November 12th updates. KB5046617 for Windows 11 24H2, KB5046617 for Windows 11 23H2. The list goes on.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see a pattern here. Patching these updates is absolutely crucial to closing off a wide range of potential attack vectors. We've covered a lot of ground already, but it looks like there's still plenty more to dissect. What's next on the agenda?
Let's shift our focus to another cluster of elevation of privilege vulnerabilities, this time with a CVSS score of 7.8, affecting a variety of Windows components. These include flaws in Windows client-side, caching the Windows registry, a Windows kernel mode driver, Win32K, the Windows kernel itself, and the Windows DWM core library.
Okay, so a mix of attack surfaces and potential impacts. Before we get into the specifics of each vulnerability, what are some overarching themes or concerns you're seeing with this cluster?
One thing that stands out is the recurring theme of untrusted pointer dereferences. We see this in CVE 2024-43636, affecting Win32K, CVE 2024-43636, affecting Win32K, CVE 2024-43630 in the Windows kernel, and CVE 2024-43629 in the Windows DWM core library. This type of vulnerability highlights the need for robust security audits for critical applications in your environment, just as a precaution.
That's a good point. It's a reminder that security is an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. So let's break down these individual vulnerabilities, starting with CVE 2024-43644 in Windows client-side caching. What should admins be aware of?
This vulnerability arising from an out-of-bounds read could allow an attacker with low privileges to escalate their access to system level. It's a local attack vector, meaning the attacker needs some level of access to the system, but the potential impact is significant. They could gain unauthorized access to sensitive information and potentially even modify files.
So a classic privilege escalation scenario with potential for data breaches or system manipulation. What about CVE 2024-43641, the one impacting the Windows registry?
This one stems from an integer overflow issue, and it's particularly concerning because it can be exploited locally without user interaction and with low attack complexity. That means it's relatively easy for an attacker to pull off. The potential consequences are severe, potentially leading to a complete loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the affected resources.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster. I'm assuming the patch for this one is yet again bundled into those November 12th updates.
You're right on the money. KB5046612, KB5046617, KB504 696, the usual suspects. Let's move on to CVE 2024-43640, which resides in a Windows kernel mode driver.
Another critical component. What's the attack vector here?
This one stems from a double free error. Again, an attacker could exploit this locally, needing only low privileges to gain system privileges. The lack of user interaction requirement makes it even more dangerous, as it could happen silently in the background.
So another potential pathway for an attacker to gain complete control of a system. I'm starting to see why Microsoft bundled all these patches together.
Exactly. They're addressing a range of interconnected vulnerabilities that together paint a picture of the evolving threat landscape. Let's move on to CVE 2024-43636 in Win32K. This one's similar to some we've already discussed. It involves an untrusted pointer dereference exploitable locally without user interaction, leading to system privileges.
Another classic privilege escalation vulnerability. I'm sensing a theme here. Are the remaining vulnerabilities in this cluster similar in nature?
You're catching on quickly. CVE 2024-43630 in the Windows kernel caused by a stack-based buffer overflow follows the same pattern. Low privileges, local exploit potential for system access, and addressed by those familiar KB numbers. And finally, we have CVE 2024-43629 in the Windows DWM core library, yet another untrusted pointer dereference issue leading to potential system compromise.
Okay, I think I've got those KB numbers memorized by now. What's next on our list?
Let's shift our focus to vulnerabilities that exploit physical access. We've got a cluster of vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 7.5, all involving elevation of privilege and primarily impacting the Windows USB video class system driver. These are CVE 2024-43643, CVE 2024-43638, CVE 2024-43637, and CVE 2024-43634. All of these vulnerabilities could allow an attacker to gain system privileges by physically connecting a malicious USB device to a victim's machine. No prior authentication or user interaction is required.
That's a good reminder that physical security is just as crucial as cybersecurity. An attacker who can gain physical access can often bypass even the most sophisticated software defenses.
Absolutely. We tend to focus on remote attacks, but we can't forget about the risks posed by malicious insiders or individuals with physical access to devices. These vulnerabilities underscore the need for strong physical security measures, such as controlling access to workstations and servers, implementing device security policies, and educating users about the risks of untrusted USB devices.
Good points. So while patching is crucial, it's not the only solution. Organizations need a holistic approach to security that encompasses both physical and digital realms. Are the patches for these USB vulnerabilities also bundled into the November 12th updates?
You bet they are. KB 5046633 for Windows 11 23H2 and 22H2, KB 5046617 for Windows 11 24H2 and Windows Server 2025, and so on. The PortalFuse report provides the complete list of KBs based on your specific Windows versions.
Okay. We're making good progress through this week's batch of CVEs. What's next on the agenda?
Let's move down to the vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 6.8 still categorized as important. We have CVE 2024-43645, CVE 2024-43639, and CVE 2024-43632, all impacting the Windows USB video class system driver.
So more vulnerabilities related to malicious USB devices. Anything different about these compared to the ones we discussed earlier?
Not in terms of the attack vector, it's the same scenario. An attacker physically connects a malicious USB device to a victim's machine, potentially gaining system privileges without needing any prior authentication or user interaction. The underlying flaws might differ, but the outcome is similar.
And I'm assuming the patches are yet again in the November 12th updates.
Precisely. KB504617, KB504696, KB50466633, the same ones we've been talking about.
It's starting to feel like those KB numbers are permanently etched into my brain. What's next on our list?
Let's shift gears again and delve into a couple of vulnerabilities, with a CVSS score of 6.5 categorized as moderate in terms of severity. We have CVE 2024-43451, an NTLM hash disclosure spoofing vulnerability, and CVE 2024-49038, a Windows Common Log File System driver information disclosure vulnerability.
Okay, we're starting to get into some more specialized vulnerabilities. Let's tackle them one by one. What's the deal with CVE 2024-43451?
This one's a spoofing vulnerability that could allow an attacker to steal a user's NTLM-v2 hash. This hash could then be used to authenticate as that user, essentially impersonating them.
So a real threat to user accounts and potentially a gateway to further compromise within a network?
Exactly. What makes this vulnerability particularly concerning is that it requires minimal user interaction, such as clicking a link in a phishing email or opening a malicious file.
So a successful phishing campaign could potentially trigger this vulnerability and allow an attacker to gain access to sensitive user credentials.
That's a very real possibility. And given the prevalence of phishing attacks, this vulnerability, despite its moderate severity rating, should be taken seriously.
What about mitigation? I'm assuming a patch is available, but are there other steps organizations can take to minimize their risk?
Of course. The patch is included in those November 12th updates. KB504617, KB50466696, KB50466633. The ones we've been talking about. But beyond patching, it's crucial to implement strong security awareness training for your users, focusing on phishing identification and prevention. Multi-factor authentication is also essential to prevent unauthorized access, even if an attacker manages to obtain a user's NTLM-v2 hash.
Those are all excellent points. So a layered approach to security is crucial, combining technical solutions like patching with user education and robust authentication mechanisms. What about the other moderate severity vulnerabilities, CVE 2024-49038, the one impacting the Windows Common Log File System driver?
This one's an information disclosure flaw that could allow an attacker to read arbitrary files. It's a local vulnerability, meaning the attacker needs access to the system and requires low privileges.
So not as high impact as some of the others we've discussed, but still potential vector for data leaks or unauthorized access to sensitive information.
Correct. While it might not directly lead to system compromise, it could provide an attacker with valuable information that they could use for further attacks. And as you might expect, the fix for this one is also included in those November 12th updates. KB504617, KB5046696, KB5046633.
All right, those KB numbers are starting to feel like old friends at this point. What's next on our deep dive agenda?
We have one last cluster to cover. These are vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 4.3, putting them in the low severity category.
Low severity, but still worth discussing, right? Especially for organizations that aim for a comprehensive security posture.
Absolutely. Even low severity vulnerabilities can be exploited, especially if attackers chain them together to create a more significant attack. We have CVE 2024-43450, a Microsoft Edge Chromium-based elevation of privilege vulnerability.
Okay, so a shift from the Windows operating system to the Edge browser. What's the attack vector here?
This vulnerability arises from improper validation of input to a method, and an attacker could potentially exploit this to gain elevated privileges on an affected system. Essentially, they would need to find a way to inject malicious input into the Edge browser.
So a scenario where a user visits a malicious website or interacts with compromised content, perhaps through a phishing email or social engineering attack.
That's a plausible scenario. The good news is that the attack complexity is rated as high, meaning it's not a trivial exploit to pull off. However, Microsoft has released a specific security update for Microsoft Edge version 123.0.150.74 to address this vulnerability.
So make sure your Edge browsers are up to date, just like you're patching your Windows systems. Any other low-severity vulnerabilities we need to cover?
Yes, we have CVE 2024-43449, a Microsoft Windows graphics component denial of service vulnerability. This one could be exploited by sending a specially crafted file to an affected system, potentially triggering a denial of service condition.
So a disruption of system operations, but not necessarily a complete system compromise.
Correct. While the impact is less severe than some of the other vulnerabilities we've discussed, it could still cause inconvenience and disrupt critical operations. The fix for this one is, you guessed it, included in those KBs we've been talking about. KB5046696, KB5046633, and KB5046617.
It seems those KV numbers have become our constant companions on this deep dive journey.
They have, haven't they? It's a testament to the breadth of security updates Microsoft has released this month, covering a wide range of components and potential attack vectors. Before we wrap up, there are a couple of updated CVEs from previous weeks that we need to revisit. CVE 2024-43528 and CVE 2024-43516.
Ah, yes, good catch. Those both impact Windows Secure Kernel Mode and involve elevation of privilege. What's new with them?
The key updates here are additions to the FAQs and a renewed emphasis on updating VBS-related policies, specifically virtualization-based security policies.
So going beyond the initial patches and hardening the security posture even further.
Exactly. Microsoft has released KB 5042562, which specifically focuses on blocking rollback of VBS-related updates. They're stressing the importance of not only installing the security updates from October 2024, which initially addressed these vulnerabilities, but also reviewing and updating those VBS policies.
So an extra layer of protection, making it even more difficult for attackers to exploit these vulnerabilities, even if they find a way past the initial patches. This suggests that Microsoft is seeing active attempts to exploit these vulnerabilities and is taking steps to mitigate the risk.
That's a very astute observation. It underscores the importance of proactive security practices and staying ahead of the evolving threat landscape. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from remote code execution to privilege escalation, from denial of service to information disclosure. We've explored a range of vulnerabilities and the latest security updates from Microsoft.
It's been a whirlwind of information, but I feel like I've gained a much deeper understanding of the current threat landscape and the steps organizations need to take to protect their systems and data. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts or key takeaways for our listeners?
I'd say the overarching message is this. Patching is paramount. Make sure your systems are up to date with the latest security updates, including those crucial KBs we've been discussing throughout this deep dive.
Good advice. And don't forget those VBS policies. Review and update them to further harden your systems against potential attacks.
It seems like every layer we peel back reveals another set of vulnerabilities and the crucial patches to address them. It's a constant game of cat-mouse, isn't it?
It is. But by staying informed, prioritizing patching, and implementing robust security practices, organizations can significantly reduce their risk. Knowledge is power, especially in the cybersecurity realm.
Absolutely. Speaking of knowledge, didn't we miss one vulnerability earlier? I believe it was CVE 2024-43635, an elevation of privilege flaw in the Windows telephony service.
You're absolutely right. It got lost in the shuffle amidst all those other vulnerabilities. Good catch.
Thanks.
So what do we need to know about this one?
CVE 2024-43635, with a CVSS score of 7.8, arises from an integer overflow condition. Similar to some of the other vulnerabilities we discussed earlier, an attacker would need to trick a user into connecting to a malicious server to exploit this flaw.
So another scenario where social engineering tactics like phishing could play a role in the attack.
Exactly. The attacker would need to convince a user to send a request to that malicious server, which could then return harmful data, potentially leading to code execution on the user system.
And the patch for this one, I'm assuming it's bundled into those November 12th security updates we've been discussing.
You're right on track. KB 5046617 for Windows Server 2025 and Windows 11 24H2, KB 5046682 for Windows Server 2012, R2 KB 5046613 for Windows 10 22H2, and KB 5046633 for Windows 11 23H2. The usual suspects as you've come to know them.
Okay, I think we finally covered all the CDs for this week. It's been an intense deep dive, to say the least.
It has. But we've accomplished our mission. You now have a comprehensive understanding of the latest Microsoft security vulnerabilities and the necessary updates to address them. Remember, a well-protected system is a proactive one. Stay vigilant, prioritize patching, and don't hesitate to dive deeper into the details provided in the PortalFuse report. Until next time, stay secure.
Great advice. Thanks for guiding us through this complex landscape of vulnerabilities and patches. And to our listeners, stay informed, stay secure, and we'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.
It seems like every layer we peel back reveals another set of vulnerabilities and the crucial patches to address them. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, isn't it?
It is. But by staying informed, prioritizing patching, and implementing robust security practices, organizations can significantly reduce their risk. Knowledge is power, especially in the cybersecurity realm.
Absolutely. Speaking of knowledge, didn't we miss one vulnerability earlier? I believe it was CVE 2024-43635, an elevation of privilege flaw in the Windows telephony service.
You're absolutely right. It got lost in the shuffle amidst all those other vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Good catch.
Thanks.
So what do we need to know about this one?
CVE 2024-43635, with a CVSS score of 7.8, arises from an integer overflow condition. Similar to some of the other vulnerabilities we discussed earlier, an attacker would need to trick a user into connecting to a malicious server to exploit this flaw.
So another scenario where social engineering tactics like phishing could play a role in the attack.
Exactly. The attacker would need to convince a user to send a request to that malicious server, which could then return harmful data, potentially leading to code execution on the user's system.
And a patch for this one, I'm assuming it's bundled into those November 12th security updates we've been discussing.
You're right on track. KB50466617 for Windows Server 2025 and Windows 11 24H2. KB50466682 for Windows Server 2012, R2, KB504613 for Windows 10 22H2, and KB50466633 for Windows 11 23H2. The usual suspects as you've come to know them.
Okay, so I think we've finally covered all the CVEs for this week. It's been an intense deep dive, to say the least.
It has, but we've accomplished our mission. You now have a comprehensive understanding of the latest Microsoft security vulnerabilities and the necessary updates to address them. Remember, a well-protected system is a proactive one. Stay vigilant, prioritize patching, and don't hesitate to dive deeper into the details provided in the PortalFuse report. Until next time, stay secure.
Great advice. Thanks for guiding us through this complex landscape of vulnerabilities and patches. And to our listeners, stay informed, stay secure, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.